Commander Zethka sat in the interrogation chamber, his 4 arms shackled to the metal chair. His purple skin had lost its usual vibrant hue, now pale with fear. Across from him, Admiral Chen maintained a calm expression, but her dark eyes held the weight of 1,000 fallen soldiers. The Galactic Council had been unanimous in their decision. After the devastating defeat at the Kepler station, someone had to answer for the catastrophic miscalculation that led to the deaths of 3 million coalition forces. Zethka, former Supreme Commander of the Vorthon Empire's Third Fleet, was that someone. "Tell me about your first encounter with humanity," Admiral Chen said, her voice steady as steel. "Start from the beginning." Zethka's mandibles clicked nervously. His species, the Vorthons, had ruled the Outer Rim for centuries. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with chitinous armor covering their bodies and 4 powerful arms that could crush titanium. For generations, they had been the apex predators of known space. "It was 3 solar cycles ago," Zethka began, his voice a low rumble. "Our scouts reported a new species had achieved faster-than-light travel. They called themselves humans. Small creatures barely reaching our chest height, pink and brown skin, thin and fragile-looking. Only 2 arms, can you imagine?" The commander's eyes grew distant as he recalled that first intelligence briefing. The holographic displays had shown images of human cities, their primitive-looking technology, their small stature compared to the other sapient species in the galaxy. "My science officer, Gorvak, ran the standard threat assessment. The humans averaged 1.7 meters in height, possessed no natural weapons like claws or fangs, had thin skin that could be easily punctured, and their bone density was significantly lower than ours. Their technology was centuries behind the Galactic Coalition standard." Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly. "What was your recommendation to the High Command?" "Immediate subjugation," Zethka admitted, shame creeping into his voice. "I classified them as Class 7 primitives, suitable for slave labor in our mining colonies. The High Command agreed. They seemed so weak." The first contact had been a disaster from the human perspective, though the Vorthons hadn't realized it at the time. Zethka's fleet of 12 dreadnoughts had emerged from hyperspace near Earth's moon, their massive hulls blocking out the sun over several human cities. "We sent the standard surrender demand," Zethka continued. "Submit to Vorthon rule, relocate to designated colonies, and serve the Empire. It was routine. Most species surrender immediately when they see our fleet. The smart ones recognize they cannot win." But the humans had surprised them with their response. Instead of cowering or immediately surrendering, they had asked for 24 hours to consider the terms. Zethka had laughed at the request, but granted it, amused by their false hope. During that day, my sensors detected massive movement across their planet, ships launching, communications networks buzzing with activity. I assumed they were evacuating their leaders or preparing some kind of ceremonial surrender. Many primitive species have elaborate rituals around defeat. Admiral Chen's expression remained neutral. But Zethka caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Pride, perhaps. When the deadline arrived, they sent a single message, just 2 words in their primitive language. "Come try." My translation software initially malfunctioned. Surely they meant "we surrender" or "please spare us." But no, they had actually challenged us. Challenged the mighty Vorthon Empire to combat. The memory still bewildered him. In all his years of conquest, no species had ever responded to overwhelming force with such casual defiance. The Vorthons had conquered 47 star systems, subjugated dozens of species, and built an empire that stretched across 3 galactic arms. Yet these small, soft creatures had told them to come try. I decided to make an example of their moon colony first. Show them what Vorthon power looked like. My flagship, the Eternal Conquest, moved into position. 2 million tons of battle-tested warship against a small research station with maybe 300 humans aboard. Zethka paused, his voice becoming quieter. The station had no weapons, no shields, just some communication arrays and what looked like mining equipment. It should have been destroyed in seconds. But when the Eternal Conquest fired its main plasma cannon, the humans had surprised them again. Instead of the expected explosion, the station seemed to absorb the blast entirely. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the small mining equipment on the station's surface began to move. What we thought was mining equipment turned out to be something else entirely. Mass drivers, they called them. Electromagnetic launchers designed to send cargo containers between planets. Except they weren't launching cargo containers anymore. The first projectile hit the Eternal Conquest at 17% light speed. A simple chunk of iron ore, no bigger than a human fist, but accelerated to incredible velocity. It punched through the dreadnought's shields as if they weren't there, tore through 15 decks of armor plating, and created a hole you could fly a shuttle through. "Impossible," Zethka's second-in-command had whispered as damage reports flooded in. The Vorthons had fought species with advanced energy weapons, plasma cannons, even primitive antimatter warheads. But no one had ever thought to simply throw rocks really, really fast. The second projectile took out our main engine. The third destroyed our primary weapon array. In less than 30 seconds, the flagship of the Vorthon Third Fleet was crippled by what amounted to an oversized slingshot operated by 300 humans in a research station. Admiral Chen made a note on her tablet. "What was your response to this unexpected resistance?" Zethka's mandibles clicked in what passed for a bitter laugh among his species. "I ordered the full fleet to attack. 11 remaining dreadnoughts against one small station. Surely they couldn't have enough ammunition to threaten us all." But the humans had surprised them yet again. As the Vorthon fleet moved closer, more stations began powering up around the moon. What the aliens had taken for communication arrays and sensor equipment revealed themselves to be camouflaged weapons platforms, dozens of them. They had been preparing for war from the moment they detected our approach. While we were analyzing their surrender request, they were positioning assets, calculating firing solutions, and turning their entire solar system into a fortress. We had given them 24 hours to prepare, and they had used every second. The battle for Luna, as the humans called it, lasted 6 hours. By the end, 8 Vorthon dreadnoughts were either destroyed or severely damaged. The humans lost their research station and took casualties they couldn't easily replace, but they had sent a message that echoed across the galaxy. Humanity would not go quietly into slavery. "After Luna, I recommended a full withdrawal to reassess the threat level," Zethka admitted. But High Command was furious. A handful of primitives had bloodied the nose of the Empire's finest fleet. They demanded immediate retaliation with maximum force. Within 2 weeks, the Vorthon Empire assembled the largest invasion fleet in their history. 300 warships, including their newest super dreadnoughts, mobile space stations capable of glassing entire planets. The fleet carried invasion troops numbering in the millions, enough to occupy 100 worlds. The orders were clear, Zethka continued, his voice growing hollow. Complete extermination. No prisoners, no slaves, no survivors. Humanity was to be erased from existence as an example to other primitive species who might consider resistance. But as the massive fleet approached Earth's solar system, they found it empty. No defending ships, no space stations, no signs of military presence. Even the planet seemed strangely quiet, with minimal communication traffic and no visible preparations for defense. "We thought they had fled," Zethka explained. "Many species attempt to scatter when facing extinction-level threats. We prepared to occupy their home world and then hunt down their refugee fleets across the galaxy." Admiral Chen's expression darkened. She knew what came next in the story. Every human did. The Vorthon fleet entered Earth's atmosphere expecting easy victory. They found hell instead. The humans hadn't fled. They had dug in. Every city, every town, every settlement had been transformed into a fortress. The species that seemed so weak and fragile had revealed their true nature. They were persistence hunters, creatures evolved to never give up, never surrender, and never stop fighting. The first landing force was the 47th Shock Infantry, Zethka recalled. Elite Vorthan warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. They landed outside what the humans called New York City, expecting to face cowering civilians and token resistance. Instead, they found an entire city turned into a weapon. Every building was a bunker. Every street was a killing field. Every human was a soldier willing to die before yielding an inch of their home world. The fighting in the urban areas was unlike anything we had experienced, Zethka continued. Our warriors are bred for open combat, for crushing enemies through superior strength and firepower. But the humans fought like ghosts. They appeared from nowhere, struck with incredible violence, then vanished into their underground tunnels and hidden passages. The Vorthan soldiers, despite their advantages in size and strength, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Humans seemed to know their cities better than the aliens knew their own ships. They used the terrain, the infrastructure, even the weather to their advantage. One human could take down 3 of our warriors in close combat, Zethka admitted. Not through superior strength, but through tactics we had never encountered. They fought with a creativity and adaptability that our rigid military doctrine couldn't counter. Every engagement taught them something new about our weaknesses, while they revealed new strengths we never suspected they possessed. Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair, studying the broken alien commander. Tell me about the moment you realized your assessment was wrong. Zethka closed his eyes, reliving a memory that had haunted him for years. Day 7 of the occupation. I was aboard my command ship watching feeds from the ground forces. My officers were reporting increasing casualties, supply line disruptions, and communication blackouts. What should have been a simple mop-up operation had turned into a nightmare. The moment that changed everything came when Zethka watched a single human female defend her offspring against a full squad of Vorthan soldiers. She had no weapons, no armor, no military training, just a primitive projectile weapon and the absolute refusal to let harm come to her child. She held them off for 47 minutes, Zethka whispered. 1 small human against 8 trained warriors. She used furniture as cover, household chemicals as weapons, and fought with a fury that defied logic. When we finally stopped her, she had killed 3 of my soldiers and wounded 4 others. That night, as Zethka reviewed casualty reports from across the planet, the truth began to dawn on him. The humans weren't weak. They were the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever seen, and the Vorthans had just awoken a sleeping giant. I began to understand that we had made a fundamental error, he continued. We measured strength by size, armor, and natural weapons. But humans had something we didn't. They never gave up. Ever. Each defeat only made them more determined. Each loss taught them how to fight better. They turned their apparent weaknesses into advantages we couldn't comprehend. Admiral Chen stood up, her shadow falling across the shackled alien. You're going to tell me about the real war now, aren't you? About what happened when humanity stopped playing defense and started playing offense. Zethka's purple skin grew even paler. His next words would reveal the truth that had shattered the Vorthan Empire and changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Admiral, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, what I'm about to tell you will explain why half the galaxy now fears the mention of humanity. It will explain why the mighty Vorthan Empire, rulers of 47 star systems, now exists only as scattered refugee fleets begging for sanctuary. He looked up at her with something approaching respect in his alien eyes. It will explain why we thought we were the apex predators of the universe, until we met the species that invented the concept of total war. Admiral Chen poured herself a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the interrogation chamber. She had been dreading this part of the testimony, but the Galactic Council needed to understand exactly how the war had escalated from a simple invasion to the complete reorganization of galactic power structures. "Continue, Commander," she said, settling back into her chair. "Tell me about Operation Broken Chain." Zeth Ka flinched at the mention of that name. Even among his own people, Operation Broken Chain had become synonymous with catastrophic failure and hubris. It was the moment when the Vorthon Empire learned that humans didn't just defend their territory, they hunted their enemies to extinction. "The ground war on Earth lasted 3 months, Zeth Ka began, his voice hollow. 3 months of losses we had never experienced before. My forces were being bled dry by an enemy that refused to follow conventional warfare doctrine. Every day brought new casualties, new tactical disasters, new proof that we had gravely underestimated our opponents. The breaking point had come when human resistance forces managed to capture a Vorthon communication array. Within hours, they had decoded the Empire's military encryption and gained access to fleet communications. The psychological impact on Vorthon forces was devastating. The primitive creatures they were supposed to easily dominate were now listening to their every tactical discussion. "High Command ordered a strategic withdrawal from Earth," Zeth Ka continued. "Not a retreat," they insisted, but a tactical repositioning to allow for orbital bombardment. We would glass the planet from space and end the human threat permanently. But as the Vorthon fleet pulled back to bombardment range, something unprecedented happened. The humans followed them. Not in ships, they barely had a space navy worth mentioning. They followed in ways the Vorthons never expected. The first sign something was wrong came when our rear guard reported debris impacts, Zeth Ka recalled. Nothing major, small objects striking our hulls at high velocity. Our sensors initially classified them as micrometeorites or space junk stirred up by our engine wash. Admiral Chen knew better. "They weren't debris, were they?" "No," Zeth Ka whispered. "They were humans. Individual humans in primitive spacesuits, launched from hidden catapults on Earth's surface. No life support beyond basic oxygen recyclers. No weapons except what they could carry, no way home. They were conducting suicide missions against starships using nothing but determination and improvised equipment." The image still haunted Zeth Ka's nightmares. Hundreds of humans fired into space like artillery shells, using crude calculations and desperate courage to intercept Vorthon vessels. Most died in the void, their bodies lost forever in the darkness between worlds. But some reached their targets. "They carried shaped charges built from mining equipment and agricultural chemicals," Zeth Ka explained. "Primitive explosives that our sensors barely registered as threats, but placed correctly against engine housings or sensor arrays, they caused devastating damage. A single human with a 20-kilogram bomb could cripple a dreadnought. The Vorthon fleet found itself under attack by an enemy that couldn't possibly exist, according to all known laws of warfare. Individual soldiers were assaulting starships, turning themselves into guided missiles with nothing but basic physics and unbreakable will. Admiral Korvex, my second-in-command, recommended immediate departure from the system," Zeth Ka continued. "He argued that no strategic objective was worth losses like we were sustaining. But I overruled him. I couldn't accept that a handful of primitives could force the Vorthon Empire to retreat." That decision would haunt Zeth Ka for the rest of his life. Instead of withdrawing, he ordered the fleet to maintain position and begin systematic bombardment of Earth. The planet's surface burned under plasma bombardment, while the human population took shelter in deep underground bunkers they had been secretly constructing for decades. "We killed billions," Zeth Ka admitted, his voice breaking. "Entire continents were reduced to molten glass. We thought we had won. The bombardment continued for days until our energy reserves were nearly depleted. Earth appeared lifeless, a smoking ruin incapable of supporting any form of life. But the humans weren't finished. While the Vorthan fleet celebrated their Pyrrhic victory, automated systems activated across Earth's solar system. The same mining equipment that had bloodied them at Luna began launching projectiles again, but these weren't aimed at the immediate vicinity. "Long-range mass drivers," Admiral Chen said quietly. "They were shooting at your home worlds." Zethka nodded miserably. Chunks of iron and nickel, accelerated to near-light speed and aimed at targets dozens of light-years away. The projectiles would take years to reach their destinations, but when they did... He shuddered. The humans had calculated the orbital mechanics perfectly. While their planet burned, their automated systems were launching kinetic kill vehicles at every major Vorthan world. The projectiles were too small to detect at interstellar distances, too fast to intercept even if detected, and carried enough kinetic energy to crack continents. "The first impact hit our agricultural world of Nethys Prime," Zethka recalled. "A chunk of Earth iron traveling at 18% light speed struck the planet's largest continent. The explosion was visible from orbit. 12 billion Vorthans died in the first few seconds. The shockwave cracked the planet's crust and triggered massive volcanic eruptions that rendered the world uninhabitable. But that was just the beginning. Over the following months, Vorthan worlds across the Empire began experiencing similar attacks. Industrial centers, military bases, civilian populations. The humans had targeted everything. They weren't just fighting a war, they were systematically dismantling an entire galactic civilization. "How many?" Admiral Chen asked. 43 worlds, Zethka whispered. 43 worlds struck by human kinetic weapons over the course of 2 years. Some took multiple hits. Our homeworld of Vorthak received 17 separate impacts, each one targeting a different continent. By the time it was over, our empire had lost nearly 90% of its population and industrial capacity. The Vorthan military had tried to respond, but they faced an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. The humans weren't content to simply defend themselves or even seek revenge. They were fighting a war of extinction, using the cold mathematics of physics to deliver death across interstellar distances. "We attempted counter-strikes," Zethka continued. "Our remaining fleets launched attacks against Earth's solar system, hoping to destroy the mass drivers before they could launch more projectiles. But the humans had anticipated this. They had built backup systems throughout their solar system, hidden installations on asteroids and moons that we couldn't locate. More importantly, the humans had done something that the Vorthans found incomprehensible. They had shared their technology. Every species that had ever been threatened by the Vorthan Empire received detailed plans for kinetic kill weapons, along with targeting data for Vorthan worlds. Within a year, half the galaxy was shooting rocks at us, Zethka said bitterly. Species we had never even contacted were launching projectiles at our remaining colonies. The humans had turned our own imperialism against us, creating a galactic coalition dedicated to our complete destruction. Admiral Chen made another note. "When did you realize the war was lost?" "The moment I received a message from Earth," Zethka replied. 3 months after we had glassed their planet, reduced it to smoking ruins, I received a transmission from the surface. It was a human female, broadcasting from somewhere beneath the devastated surface. The message had been simple and direct. The humans were still alive, still fighting, and still building weapons in their underground factories. The bombardment had been inconvenient, nothing more. They had simply moved their civilization deeper underground and continued their war from bunkers that could withstand direct nuclear strikes. She told me that they had launched over 3,000 kinetic kill vehicles, Zethka continued. 3,000 projectiles aimed at every significant Vorthan installation in known space. She provided exact coordinates and impact timings for each one. Then she made an offer. The offer had been typical of human thinking. Surrender unconditionally and face trial for war crimes, or continue fighting and watch the complete extinction of the Vorthan species. Not just military defeat, but literal extinction. Every Vorthon world, every colony, every ship would be systematically destroyed over the following decades. I tried to negotiate, Zethka admitted. I offered reparations, territorial concessions, even the complete withdrawal of Vorthan forces from disputed systems. But the humans were no longer interested in negotiation. They had moved beyond conventional warfare into something far more terrifying. The human response had been delivered by the same female who had made the original offer. She explained that humanity had learned an important lesson from the Vorthon invasion. The galaxy was full of species that viewed humans as weak prey. The only way to ensure long-term survival was to make sure that every potential aggressor understood the consequences of threatening Earth. They called it the deterrence doctrine, Zethka explained. Any species that attacked humanity would face complete extinction. Not defeat, not subjugation, extinction. They would hunt every last member of that species across the galaxy until none remained. To prove their point, the humans had begun broadcasting the locations and trajectories of their kinetic weapons to the entire galaxy. Every species could watch in real time as Vortan worlds were systematically destroyed. It was a demonstration of power and resolve that sent shock waves through every galactic government. The hegemony tried to intervene, Zethka continued, referring to the galaxy's most powerful military alliance. They demanded that humanity cease their attacks and submit to galactic arbitration. The human response was educational. The humans had calmly explained that they possessed kinetic kill weapons targeted at every major world in the hegemony. The weapons had been launched years earlier and were already in transit. If the hegemony interfered in humanity's war against the Vorthans, their own worlds would begin experiencing impacts within months. That's when I knew we were fighting something beyond our comprehension, Zethka said. The humans hadn't just prepared for war with us. They had prepared for war with everyone. They had spent decades in isolation, not because they were weak, but because they were building the most devastating military capability the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the chamber's small window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, kinetic weapons launched by her own species were still traveling toward their targets, carrying death across impossible distances. You mentioned earlier that this was when humanity stopped playing defense, she said without turning around. What did you mean by that? Zethka's mandibles clicked nervously. Admiral, what I told you about the kinetic bombardment, that was just the beginning. Once the humans confirmed that their long-range weapons were effective, they began the second phase of their war plan. He paused, gathering the courage to continue. They began hunting us personally. Admiral Chen turned back to face him, her expression grim. The worst part of the story was about to begin, and they both knew it. The part that had earned humanity a reputation that made even the galaxy's most aggressive species think twice before starting conflicts. Tell me about the hunter-killers, she said quietly. The interrogation chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Admiral Chen returned to her seat, her coffee now cold and forgotten. She had hoped never to hear about the hunter-killer program from a first-hand witness. But the Galactic Council's investigation required complete transparency about humanity's wartime activities. The hunter-killers, Zethka began, his voice barely audible. I first learned about them when my personal flagship, the Pride of Vorthak, suffered what we initially thought was a systems malfunction. We were conducting a routine patrol in the outer spiral, far from any human presence or known battle zones. The malfunction had been subtle at first. Minor system glitches, communication delays, power fluctuations that lasted only milliseconds. The ship's engineers found nothing wrong with the equipment, and the problems seemed to resolve themselves before they could be properly diagnosed. It was my security chief who first suggested we might have been infiltrated, Zethka continued. But that seemed impossible. We were in deep space, hundreds of light years from Earth. Our ship had been thoroughly scanned for any foreign objects or unauthorized life signs. How could humans possibly have infiltrated a Vorthon dreadnought? The answer came a week later when Zeth Ka's cabin environmental system was found to contain an unauthorized modification. Hidden within the air recycling unit was a small device the size of a human thumb, composed of materials so common they barely registered on security scans. "A data collection module," Admiral Chen said. It wasn't a question. "More than that," Zeth Ka replied. "It was an entire intelligence network compressed into something smaller than my smallest claw. It had been monitoring our communications, recording our tactical discussions, mapping our ship's systems, and transmitting everything back to human intelligence services." But discovery of the device led to an even more disturbing revelation. Analysis showed it had been installed during a routine maintenance stop at a neutral trading station 6 months earlier. Security footage from the station revealed the perpetrator, a human maintenance worker who had somehow gained access to Vorthon military vessels. "One human," Zeth Ka emphasized. "One human posing as a civilian technician had infiltrated the most secure military installation in our territory and planted monitoring devices on dozens of our ships. When we investigated further, we found similar devices throughout our fleet." The scope of human penetration into Vorthon military operations was staggering. They had maintenance workers on space stations, traders who dealt with Vorthon suppliers, even diplomatic personnel who attended interspecies conferences. All of them were gathering intelligence and preparing for what would come next. "The humans had been planning this war for decades," Zeth Ka explained. "While we saw them as primitive and isolated, they were actually studying every major power in the galaxy, learning our weaknesses, mapping our infrastructure, identifying key targets and individuals." Admiral Chen leaned forward. "When did the active hunting begin?" Zeth Ka's purple skin seemed to darken as he recalled that terrible period. 3 months after the bombardment of Earth ended, our intelligence services began reporting the disappearance of high-ranking military personnel across the Empire. Not deaths in combat, not casualties from the kinetic bombardments, actual disappearances. The first to vanish was Admiral Korvex, Zeth Ka's own second-in-command. He had been attending a strategic planning meeting on a heavily fortified military base in the core systems. Security footage showed him entering the conference room, but he never emerged. The room was found empty except for a single human data pad containing detailed files on every Vorthon war crime committed during the Earth invasion. Within a month, 12 of our highest-ranking officers had simply vanished, Zeth Ka continued. Each disappearance was impossible according to our security protocols. These were individuals protected by multiple layers of security, surrounded by loyal troops, operating from the most secure facilities in our empire. But the humans weren't just making people disappear. They were sending messages. Each vanished officer was replaced by evidence of human presence. Photographs of Vorthon military installations, taken from impossible angles, detailed personnel files that should have been classified beyond any human access. Sometimes even personal items belonging to the missing officers delivered to their families with notes written in perfect Vorthon script. They wanted us to know it was them, Zeth Ka realized. This wasn't random terrorism or simple assassination. It was psychological warfare designed to make our command structure understand that nowhere was safe, no one was beyond human reach. The psychological impact was devastating. Vorthon military commanders began requesting additional security, some refusing to leave their heavily fortified bases. Others became paranoid about their own staff, suspecting human infiltrators among their most trusted advisors. The Empire's military hierarchy was paralyzed by fear. "How were they doing it?" Admiral Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "That's what terrified us most," Zeth Ka replied. "We never figured it out completely. Our best analysis suggested they were using some form of advanced camouflage technology combined with extraordinary patience. A human operative might spend months establishing a false identity, gaining access to restricted areas, learning our security procedures, all while appearing to be a loyal servant of the Empire. The humans had weaponized their own apparent weakness. Because they looked harmless compared to larger, more aggressive species, they could move through galactic society almost invisibly. A human technician, trader, or diplomat could gain access to areas that would be forbidden to obviously dangerous species. They turned our prejudices against us, Zethka admitted. We had spent so long viewing humans as weak and primitive that we couldn't recognize them as threats even when they were standing right in front of us. Our security protocols were designed to detect Vorthon enemies, other large predatory species, technological threats. We had no defenses against small, patient creatures who could wait years to execute a single mission. But the disappearances were only the beginning of the hunter-killer program. As the war progressed and more Vorthon worlds fell to kinetic bombardment, human operations became increasingly aggressive. They began targeting not just military personnel, but the entire leadership structure of the Empire. Political leaders, industrial executives, even cultural figures, Zethka listed. Anyone who could be considered important to Vorthon society became a target. They were systematically decapitating our civilization, removing everyone with the knowledge or authority to organize resistance. The methods varied, but the message was always the same. Vorthon leaders would vanish without a trace, only to have their personal effects delivered to government buildings, along with detailed intelligence that proved humans had access to the Empire's most sensitive secrets. Governor Thex Ra of our manufacturing world received his own severed arm in a diplomatic pouch, Zethka recalled with a shudder, along with blueprints of his private residence, photographs of his family, and a complete schedule of his activities for the following month. The message was clear: we can reach you anywhere, anytime, and you will never see us coming. Admiral Chen made careful notes. The Galactic Council would need to understand the full scope of human capabilities when drafting future interspecies treaties. What was the Empire's response to these operations? Panic, Zethka said simply. Complete panic. Our leadership was fleeing to secret bunkers, some abandoning their posts entirely. Military commanders were refusing orders that required them to leave secure facilities. The entire chain of command was breaking down because no one could guarantee their own safety. The Vorthon Empire's attempts to counter human operations had been largely futile. They tried increased security, but humans seemed able to bypass any defensive measure. They tried counterintelligence operations, but couldn't identify human agents who had spent years building perfect false identities. They even attempted diplomatic contact, hoping to negotiate some kind of ceasefire, but the humans were no longer interested in talking. The humans had learned something from our initial invasion, Zethka explained. They learned that there were species in the galaxy who viewed diplomatic engagement as a sign of weakness. So they stopped being diplomatic. They became something far more terrifying. They became hunters. The final phase of human operations had been the most psychologically devastating. Instead of simply making Vorthon leaders disappear, humans began returning them, alive, unharmed, but fundamentally changed by their experience. Field Marshal Gorvek was missing for 3 days, Zethka recalled. When he reappeared, he was found sitting in his own office, apparently unharmed. But he had been changed. He spent the next month providing detailed intelligence about human capabilities to anyone who would listen, describing technologies and tactical doctrines that seemed impossible. The returned Vorthons all told similar stories. They had been taken to hidden human facilities, some apparently located within Vorthon space itself. There they had been shown the true scope of human military capabilities. Weapons that could destroy stars, ships that could travel faster than any known technology, manufacturing facilities that could produce entire fleets in a matter of weeks. They were shown the future, Zethka said quietly. A future where humanity had grown beyond the need for kinetic kill weapons or infiltration operations. A future where they could simply delete entire civilizations with technologies we couldn't comprehend. But the most disturbing revelation came from what the returned prisoners said about human psychology. The creatures that seemed so emotional and irrational were actually capable of thinking on timescales that dwarfed other species. They planned operations that wouldn't come to fruition for centuries. They prepared for conflicts with enemies they hadn't even encountered yet. Marshal Gorvek told us that humans had shown him detailed plans for wars against every major galactic power, Zethka continued. Not theoretical scenarios, but actual operational plans with specific timelines, resource requirements, and victory conditions. They had spent decades preparing for conflicts that might never happen, just in case. Admiral Chen felt a chill run down her spine. She was hearing confirmation of rumors that had circulated through human military intelligence for years. The contingency plans were real, and apparently, they were comprehensive beyond anything their enemies had imagined. The hunter-killer program ended when our government officially surrendered, Zethka concluded. But by then, it had already accomplished its purpose. Our entire leadership structure understood that humanity could reach any of us, anywhere, at any time. We weren't just militarily defeated. We were psychologically broken. The Vorthan Empire's surrender had been unconditional. They agreed to pay massive reparations, disarm their military forces, and submit to human oversight of their government. More importantly, they agreed to serve as an example to other species of what happened when someone made the mistake of viewing humanity as weak. The irony, Zethka said with bitter hindsight, is that we were right about humans being weak. Individually, they are small and fragile creatures with short lifespans and limited physical capabilities. But we made a fundamental error in our assessment. Admiral Chen waited for him to continue. We assumed that individual weakness meant species weakness. We never considered that humans might compensate for their individual limitations by becoming the most collectively dangerous civilization the galaxy has ever seen. They don't need to be individually strong when they can work together to move mountains, stop time, or reshape the fundamental laws of physics to suit their purposes. Zethka looked up at Admiral Chen with something approaching respect in his alien eyes. Your species taught the galaxy a lesson that will not be forgotten for 1,000 generations. You taught us that there are fates worse than death, worse than conquest, worse than slavery. You taught us that there are creatures in the universe who will hunt their enemies across space and time until justice is satisfied. He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You taught us that when humans say never again, they mean it with a certainty that can crack worlds and shatter empires. And now, every species in the galaxy knows that the small, weak creatures from Earth are the last beings in the universe you want to make angry. Admiral Chen closed her notepad and stood. The interrogation was over. The Galactic Council would have their complete record of how the Vorthan Empire had learned that humans were never weak. They had simply been waiting for someone foolish enough to give them a reason to prove exactly how strong they could be.